I think many of you would have heard Tiffany's talk yesterday. And if you haven't, well, there are also lots of YouTube videos where she has talked a lot about it. But today we specifically look at things about longevity, about things that will make us look younger, better, healthier, and so on. So, before we get there, Tiffany, I think when we had this conversation, I posted a poll on LinkedIn asking how long do people want to live, right? So I said, do you want to live to 60, 80, 100, 120? And the interesting thing was that almost 1,000 people voted, and 40% of the people said they wanted to live up to 80, and 22% said they wanted to live up to 120, which is a good sign, and the rest were 19% each. So where do you think these, what do you think based on your knowledge? One, do people want to live to 120 years?
Well, why don't we start by asking the room. So show of hands, who would like to live to be 120 years old? A few brave people up front, cheers. Okay, that's why you're in the longevity fireside, right, my friends? Now, who would want me to say, who wants to live to be healthy until 120 years? See, two hands, excellent. So this is a really important concept, right? Because we've already seen the average human lifespan double in the last 100 years, right? How many of you are older than 30? Yeah, most of us would have been dead by now, 100 years, especially if you were a woman, 100 years ago, right? So we've already done that, but we've doubled that lifespan largely by making it so that babies don't die, but also packing on lots of years at the end of life, right? And for some people that can be a very good thing, and for other people, you're sick and you're in pain and your friends are dead and your kids don't call you, and like, fuck that, right? Like, nobody wants to live like that. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about longevity, at least when I'm talking about it. So we have this concept of lifespan, which is how long our heart is actually beating, but then we have this concept of health span. How long are we actually healthy? Are we happy? Are we mobile? Are we active in our communities? And so both of those pieces now are starting to come together in really interesting ways. And a lot of folks that I talk to around the world, they want to talk about the cutting edge science fiction stuff that's happening in labs, like in Stanford is where I live, really cool stuff, and we can absolutely talk about that. But then there are also a lot of low-hanging fruit, things that we can do today, which maybe aren't quite as sexy, but really do make a big difference. And so I'd love to make sure we spend some time on that maybe toward the end. So if you remember anything, it's that bit. But let's just say that we are at a point where our lifespan, our median lifespan around the world is about 80 years. Could be a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, depending on the country. India's in the high 70s. Women live longer than men. On average around the world, also true in India, which isn't just about health, right? So let's poll the room for a second. So what are some considerations you think that people need to have when they're thinking about how long they're going to live? These could be questions, they could be things you guys are thinking about. Just shout them out. What are some things you think of? Being healthy, what else?
Finding a purpose for life.
Purpose for life, thank you. We are definitely going to come back to that. Money, yes, especially since we know around the world historically women don't invest at rates as high as men do, right? And yet the women are living longer. We need more money. Girls, talk to me about investing, because that's like a really serious thing.
If we don't have the money but we're still living longer, there must be something in our genes.
Well, there's something there, yeah, but we want to make sure again that these are good lives, right? Good years. We don't want women living 5 years longer and being impoverished. So, right, money, jobs. How many of you think you're going to work, have a 50-year career? 50. How many of you think you'll have a 70-year career? 70. 100-year career? No? Is that just like you don't want to do it, or you really don't believe you don't want to do it? Okay, so I was having this great conversation back in the green room with someone who has recently retired. He's a speaker here. And he was talking about how he's in his 70s and he's still working, but he's working less. And I said, are you happy with the amount that you're working? And he said, actually, I could be working a little bit more. And I said, okay. So when we think about a 70-year career or a 100-year career, it's not going to be the same all the way through, right? I can't work at this pace for the next 50 years, like no way. But maybe I work really hard for 15 years, and then I take some sort of step back and use that time to reskill or upskill, because technology is going to keep advancing, right? So if I want to stay in the workforce, I'm going to have to learn new skills, whatever it is, AI, quantum, metaverse, pick your buzzword, right? And now I move back into the workflow, and I'm back in the workforce, and I do that for another 15 years. So I can see a kind of a cyclical thing happening. But that's not what our societies are set up for at all, right? We expect to go to university once, we expect to have some number of jobs, right? And then we expect to retire, and for that to be the end. If you're living to 120, can you retire at 65? You can't, right? The money, it just doesn't add up. And in countries like Japan realized in the 90s that they had an aging population and that this was going to have a big effect on social services, health services, all of these government things. So in Japan in the 90s, they started edging the retirement age up, a year here and 2 years there. Do you guys remember a few years ago in France when they tried to move the retirement age up? What happened? It's happening again right now, right? Like the country's in flames because people want to retire at 65. But they haven't updated their mental model to thinking, no, I'm going to live a lot longer than people were living when that 65-year guideline was put in place. I'm talking to a lot of governments about this right now. I think I can talk about this. I'm an advisor now to the Office of the Governor of Illinois. And so I was asked to report to the governor what is the largest threat or opportunity that I see facing their government. And I said, it's longer lives. And they said, is that a threat or is that an opportunity? And I said, that is up to you, my friends. Let's figure that out.
So I think that, again, we'll have to figure out, because it's not just about individuals, it's about states and countries and how we think about living longer and all the social and political effects. But let's probably go back to saying, there are lots of these interesting things that people are now starting to understand and make those interventions that are there from nutrition and other things. People hopefully have done, all of you have done a genetic test or genomic test that we offer, for instance, and we give you some actionable insights into it, right? So where do you think that people are looking for saying that, is it enough when you look at information, or do you think that the more important thing is what you do with that information and how you do it?
I think behavior is extremely important here. So there was a recent meta-analysis in the scientific literature trying to estimate what percentage of lifespan, the number of years you're alive, is encoded in your DNA. In units of percent, what do you guys think? What percentage of how long you're going to live is in your DNA? 50? 30? The number was 10%. 10, which actually is kind of awesome, right? Because it means DNA isn't destiny. It means what you do really does matter a lot. And so the science end on this is really interesting, and I want to tell you a little bit about that science, because I think there's an interesting mindset shift here that is happening not just in the scientific community, but kind of across the broader scale. So, how many of you guys think aging is inevitable? It's just what happens. Yeah. So
a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, so philosophically, this makes sense, right? This is death and taxes. That's the two things we say are inevitable. But there's this idea now that we need to change our mindset to thinking of aging as a disease. So why is this important?
So there's death and aging are different things.
They are absolutely different things. So when we're talking about increasing longevity, we're not talking about living forever. I'm not talking about living forever, at least. Let me be fair. If you go online, there are some people who will tell you you can buy their vitamin and you will live forever. Do not do that. But so instead what we're saying is this point that Anu's bringing up, which is a subtle one. Right now, your odds of dying at any given moment increase the older you get. That makes sense, right? Just older people die. But the goal of longevity is to make your odds of dying the same throughout life. So your odds of dying at 30 are the same as your odds of dying at 90. We would like those odds to be small. But again, it's not about living forever. It's kind of a statistics statement, right? You're trying to level that out. And another interesting thing about thinking about aging as a disease is think about the things that kill us, right? Diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cancer. What do all of those things have in common? They're diseases of age, right? So again, this hypothesis here is, if we're able to tackle the fundamental process of aging at the biological level, at the molecular level, at the cellular level, you're not only slowing down the aging process, you're slowing down the progression to diabetes, to heart disease, to cancer, to stroke, to all of these things. So again, if we're taking a purely economic perspective, think about how much money that would save healthcare systems, right? To slow down or to increase the number of years you're diabetes free. That's also the number of years you could work, right? You're in good health, you're producing GDP, all of these various things. And in case you're a money person, there's another kind of interesting wrinkle to this idea of aging as a disease. Right now in the United States and in most countries, so my country has NIH, right? National Institutes of Health, which gives out research grants for people to do this basic science. But the NIH does not recognize aging as a disease. And so if you are a scientist working on aging, you cannot get money from the government for it.
Can you call it something else?
Everybody is trying to think of something else to call it. Right, so it's like literally ticking a government box in order to get money. And so then you get stuck in this cycle. Nobody has money to do the research, so nobody can do the research. So nobody believes it's a real disease, so there's no money, right? And it goes around and around. And I think that's why today we're seeing a lot of action in the private sector. A lot of companies, private companies are coming out, and some of them are coming out of places like Google, right? Like Calico. Google is a former Google company. And it's because you've got private money with people who are willing to do this mindset shift and to actually say, let's see what happens if we really tackle the fundamental molecular and cellular biology of aging. So I live in the Bay Area. I live south of San Francisco. And there's a company you might have heard of that came out of stealth last year. It's called Altos Labs. They came out of stealth with a $3 billion bank account, which rumor has it, a lot of that money is Jeff Bezos' money. He won't say one way or the other, but we all know what's going on. Silicon Valley tech billionaires. And what they did was they started poaching professors from Stanford, Berkeley, and UCSF, basically going to these professors and saying, here's $1 million, come work for us. And of course they say yes.
But Google did that 20 years ago also.
That's right.
I mean, so I think that is a model that is sort of.
That's right.
But I think there needs to be a little bit more than that, because if we want to get people to make changes, it has to be done at every level, right?
For sure. So the research that I'm talking about at Altos Labs and these various other longevity science companies, that could involve stem cells, that could involve DNA methylation, it could involve senolytics. These various things that go after what are called the hallmarks of aging, the things that happen to your biology at the molecular and cellular and tissue level. If you're interested in finding out more about that, I'd be happy to talk about it. But there's stuff that happens to your body that is really characteristic of aging. And again, mindset shift piece here, this is really important. So when I give insulin to a diabetic, am I treating their diabetes? Am I fundamentally changing their disease? I'm not, right? I'm treating the symptom. But what seems to be the case, and is becoming increasingly clear, is that if I treat the symptoms of aging, I'm actually dialing back the aging clock. So that's pretty crazy, right? Like DNA damage, or epigenetics, or senescent cells, these various things. If I clear out the senescent cells, you're actually younger on the other measures as well, which has been seen in mice, actually, in some pretty amazing ways.
So I want to take this back to say, so we were doing some research on people who live 90 and above. And the person that we found, there were 2-3 insights into it. One was that, and you mentioned that women live longer, and that was also one of the things that was there, but they also said interesting behavior was that women who were not docile or were standing on their own, make their own decisions, live longer. That was an interesting thing that came out of Professor Anil Gupta's research that he had done as well, and we are collaborating with him on that. The second thing which was interesting was that the person we found who lived the longest was a 126-year-old person who did yoga, right? So there's something about, obviously something's there in his genetic makeup, but it was more about lifestyle, right? And lifestyle, I think, plays a huge and a massive role in there are things that you can do which are, yes, supplementation and various other things, but I think there are more basic things that people can do very, very early on, and part of like what we would do with genetic counseling or with nutrition counseling and others are important elements, because that nudge or that behavior change is probably the more important thing in getting people to understand that you can change what happened to your parents. You don't have to get.
Yeah, it's super important. Have you guys heard of blue zones? Do you know what I'm talking about? Blue zones are areas around the world that have a larger number of people 100 years or older than you would expect by chance alone. And there are 5 of these blue zones around the world: Japan, Italy, Greece, Costa Rica, and California, a place in California. And diet is something that a lot of communities have in common, even all around the world. And these tend to be heavily plant-based diets. Very little red or processed meat. Fish, if you don't have to be vegetarian, vegan, lentils, that kind of thing. So the Mediterranean diet is what we're talking about. The no processed food and no red meat is a really important one. So, in India, we have a lot of vegetarians and vegans, but you guys eat a lot of processed food, right? Like all those snacks. Stop.
And fried foods.
I know, and they're so delicious, right? But they're not good for us. And the other thing, the one, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but sugar is the new smoking. If I could get one thing out of your bodies today, I would get sugar out of your bodies. So, not sweet for you guys, just really taste that tea. Like, don't put any sugar in it. And this is all tied together because one of the things that changes in aging is your body's ability to sense nutrients properly. So, interestingly, there's 2 interventions today that have really great data, not just in humans, but across all living things, that are known to extend lifespan. Do you know what they are, the 2 things? You're not going to like this, I promise. Calorie restriction is the first one, and the second one is metformin, the diabetes drug, the type 2 diabetes drug, right? So calorie restriction, we're talking like 20% reduction in calories. And there was just a human study that came out a couple of weeks ago showing that for a 20% calorie reduction, you get like 2% slower aging. And I was like, you gotta do better than that, guys. Like that's not gonna work. But the metformin is interesting. So I don't know if any of you are on metformin. If you are, you've got a bonus. I don't actually recommend that anybody go out and get a metformin prescription if you haven't already been prescribed it, because metformin can do stuff to your kidneys that's not very good. But metformin is a super cheap drug, right? It's really highly available. And so if that
30% people don't, their pharmacogenomics doesn't let them process that properly.
Which is why we need DNA testing, my friends. I'm actually gonna, just before I get off stage, I'm gonna do my DNA test and hand it over to the founder here, because when you have an opportunity like that, you jump on it. Also, in all seriousness, play with the tech. Anytime you have the chance to try out one of these things, I highly recommend doing it, because like we talked about yesterday in my keynote, DNA sequencing and DNA testing is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and we're just gonna see it in more places. Ani was sharing that, somebody recently said, some company said, we've made DNA testing cheaper in India ever before, and she's like, we've been doing it for half that amount for years. So it's already going in that direction. So food and exercise are big things that you should be doing. You should be moving every single day. I do cardio every single day. Do I like it? But it's worth it. So I recommend those things. Sleep, so important. How many of you think you get enough high quality sleep? You can admit it, my friend. I won't shame you.
Nobody else is raising their hand.
I know, nobody. One person. God bless you, my friend. So does anyone have something like an Oros ring or a sleep tracker, something like that?
Pretty much everyone.
A few people? Yeah. So do you like yours? No, it's not. Okay, so don't buy the one that he has. But some folks I know who use like an Ouro ring, they love it. And last year, improving my sleep was kind of like my big life hack that I wanted to start.
Mine this year.
Yeah, it's really important. Which actually brings me to a point I want to make sure I make. So we've talked about sleep, we've talked about exercise, we've talked about food. Another thing that these blue zones have in common is community.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, so people who have a meal with their family every day, people who walk out in town and see their neighbors, people who are active in religious organizations or community organizations. It's a huge deal. And so how many of you live in a multi-generation household? You live with your parents? Yeah, okay, it's good job, India. You guys are rocking that. I live in the United States. My dad lived with us right at the beginning. My father's Indian. He lived with us right at the beginning of the pandemic. Nobody was happy. But when we're thinking about how longevity could really impact businesses and industries, if you are in the construction industry, I highly recommend you start thinking about what multi-generation households look like for maybe 4 or 5 generations, right? India, you've got a head start on this one. There's business opportunity in the US for this because we do not do this at all. But again, this idea of community and connection is something that's really, really important for longevity. And someone at the beginning said, living a life of purpose. That's another big piece, right? Feeling that you're contributing something, that your life has meaning, that you're contributing to your community is huge for helping people stay alive longer.
So can I ask a little more philosophical question? I think you asked the question, do you want to work till 50, 60, whatever, right? For people who don't think their work is work, do you think, would they be able to, like, I don't feel my work is work, right? Do you think that then it doesn't matter and that, when you retire is immaterial because you're enjoying what you're doing, right?
I think so.
Do people take work as being work and not something that they want to do? And does that make a difference in terms of how you view health and longevity?
It really does seem to, right? If you are passionate about what you're doing, if you get out of bed in the morning and you can't wait to get started, I mean, that's a fantastic sign. First of all, that you're doing the right thing with your life. But there's been several studies showing scientifically that this really does help people live longer because they're doing something that they really care about. Now, not everybody has that privilege, and I want to be sensitive to that. There are plenty of people who work jobs that they hate because they have to in order for their families to survive. But that means, though, that there's several knobs we could be turning in order to maximize the benefits for as many people as possible. Universal basic income is an interesting experiment that some folks are doing, right? Make sure nobody can fall below a certain poverty line. Is that going to lead to lifespan extension? I have no idea, and it might take 50 or 60 years to find out. But it's an important thing to look at all the pieces. Because I'm a molecular biologist, I tend to look at the science pieces, but hopefully I've convinced you that business, society, education, all of these things are going to be impacted as long as we keep getting these longer, healthier lives.
And if people live up to 120, will we have enough room on Earth to live?
What do you guys think? If we live to be 120, can we have babies for 70 years? I have one child, so you can tell what I think about that. Yeah, I mean, this is a problem, right? Babies, where are those people gonna live? We're not making more land, right? And they have to eat. We're not getting more farmland, and climate change is coming, so that's going to make all of those pressures even harder. So how are we working on that?
It's a good question. So I know that we have about 4 minutes. I want to ask you 3 rapid questions.
The lightning round. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. You had mentioned metformin, but there are newer diabetes drugs like Ozempic and others that people are claiming that you just take a quick shot in your belly and you lose weight, you become better cardiovascular wise and anything. Would people pop a pill or would they do a plan and get their health?
I think that if people can pop a pill and not have, okay, if I told you I could give you exercise and a pill, would you do it? Yeah, I mean, I would too, even though we get more out of actual exercise. But also remember folks who are in wheelchairs, right? Or are frail, or these various things. I actually think about them really benefiting from the idea of exercise and the pill, rather than someone like me who just needs to get off the butt and go to the gym and just make it happen.
A book you recommend?
Ageless by Dr. Andrew Steele is my favorite longevity book. The reason I like that one is he is not an investor and he has not started a company, so he's not trying to sell us anything, which makes me feel a little bit better about his science. I am also not trying to sell you anything. Anna's awesome, so you should totally buy her product. But like, for me as a scientist, I've always got my eyes open for bias. So Ageless is a book that I recommend.
Thank you. And why is 120 years a secret number?
It's not a secret number at all. So we've already had people live to 120. You mentioned a 126-year-old. The oldest woman in the world died late last year. She was Japanese. She was 119 years old. She worked until she was 103. She survived both Spanish flu and COVID. And I think in the future, woman lives to 119 is not going to be headline news. Yeah, so folks think that there's some scientists who believe that there is actually something magical about the number 120, that our biology is just...
Like 42 was the answer.
42 is the answer, right. Think that there is something fundamentally limiting about 120 years, but there are also a lot of scientists who say, why? Like there's no good reason for that. And if we start getting these interventions that can actually stop the aging clock or even move it backwards, then we could go beyond that. There's this idea of a thing called longevity escape velocity. So right now, every year that you stay alive, you gain another 3 months of life because science is getting better and medicine is getting better. So longevity escape velocity happens when the science and the medicine is so good, food is so good, that for every year you live, you gain another year of life, right? So you basically stopped the clock. We are not there yet. Some of my colleagues think that is going to happen in 2029. I disagree. I think we're looking more at like 2050, but I don't think it's impossible. Which means, what is the single most important thing you can do today to have a longer, healthier life? Stay alive, yes. Do not die of something stupid now. Now is not the time. Wear your seatbelt, don't smoke, get all your shots, take your medication, brush your teeth. I'm not joking, that's a real one, brush your teeth. Keep yourself alive and healthy now, because the next decades we can really see a lot of change.
So I know we couldn't stop this clock has stopped.
Yeah, we lost our timer a couple of minutes ago, so we're just looking at a blank.
Yeah, it is not blank. But anyway, hopefully we will reverse our age ticking clock. But you mentioned a lot of things, and maybe one of the things you can do is a DNA test, because Tiffany is willing to be a model to show how you can actually do it. It's not painful at all. So you place an order online and you can get a kit in the mail and you do it yourself, like you did COVID testing in some ways.
So whenever somebody hands me a tech product and is like, do you want to try this? I'm like, yes. Where do I sign up? So I'm going to show you guys now just how this works. And since we've all done COVID tests, I get this point, it's pretty straightforward. So, Ani, what do I need to do here?
Just take and swab it inside your cheeks 10 times.
Here we go. Hopefully my lipstick won't mess it up.
And then you just turn that around. So you just need to turn it around, put it in. And that's it. That's about what you need to collect samples.
Yeah, so what I just did was scrape some cells off the inside of my cheeks, so it's totally painless. It's just a little fluffy Q-tip. Easy peasy, no needles. That's what we like. All right, thank you.
Thank you, and I know she's waiting over there.
We gotta go.
To get up, so
but
thank you,
thank you all for being here and sharing your thoughts.
For more interesting content, like, comment and subscribe to our NASSCOM YouTube channel.